we'll try to get a little bit ahead. We are ahead. I'm going to try to get ahead because I'm going to have a little bit of a challenging schedule the next little while. I had an Einukel yesterday, and my son-in-law is making a Kiddushin next Shabbos, so I'm probably going to have to go into Lakewood for next Shabbos.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And it'll be a little bit of an extended stay because my sister's making a bar mitzvah that week, and my brother Yankee is making a wedding. So I figured if we get some blutter in the bank, we'll be okay. It's good to have currency in the bank. So let's see the Gemara. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we learned a very interesting thing about Chalipin. The Gemara told us that the reason why we have a minyana dereisha, the reason why the Mishnah says there's only 3 ways with which to make Kiddushin, is because we would have otherwise thought that Chalipin would work for marriage. Dr. Gemara, Kamash will learn that it doesn't work. Break the Gemara, why Taka doesn't Chalipin work? You should learn it out, just like you learn Kinyan Kesef works from Kicha, from Steyefron. You could buy a field, you can buy a property, you can buy a Sada with a Kinyan Chalipin as well. So why do we actually say that Chalipin doesn't work? So the Gemara says, Mishum de Isha bepachas mishava pruta loimakti nafsha. So this is an interesting comment, because a Chalipin could be done with less than the Shava Pruta, but it could be done with more than the Shava Pruta as well. So just because a woman will not be makna herself for less than the Shava Pruta, why do you disqualify the entire kinyan because of it? There should just be a halacha that Chalipin works, but make sure it's more than the Shava Pruta. So that is one of the things that Tosfos discusses. I thought it was interesting. So Tosfos says, Pirish B'Kodesh, Mishum the Genai Hu Law, since it's the meaning to her to sell herself, so to speak, for less than the Pruta, Hilchach Botala Teres Chalipin B'Kedushin. Therefore, there is no halacha of Kinyan Chalipin by Kedushin. V'afilu B'chli Sheyesh B'Shava Pruta. Even if you gave her a keli that was worth more than the Shava Pruta, if you've given it to her because of Kinyan Chalipin, since the Kinyan is possible to be done with less than the Shava Pruta, so the whole Kinyan is rejected. The Kashal Renatam, the Imkain, if the whole reason why Chalipin doesn't work is because she rejects it, well then, what if she accepted it? The Imkain Pashta Yada the Kivla, Tiskadish B'Pachas M'Shava Pruta. It's not because there's something structurally wrong with Chalipin, it's because practically speaking, she won't accept it. Well, what if she did accept it? Okay, so that was the Gemara's Shaila. That was Tosfos' Shaila. So Tosfos has a little bit of a different spin on it. Like Achnir Benatam, the Gersinon, the Pachas M'Shava Pruta, Loy Mikni, period. Not Loy Mikni Nafsha, but Loy Gersina Nafsha. The Loy Bikpedi Tolim Milsa. It's not like Rashi learns that it's beneath her to be miskadeshes for less than the Shava Pruta. Elahainu Taima, Mishim de Gamar Kicha Misteyafrin. We learned Kicha from Steyafrin. Dichsiv Be Kesef. It says Kesef by Steyafrin. Uve Pachas Mishava Pruta Loy Mikri Kesef. If it's less than the Shava Pruta, it's not considered Kesef. So the whole way we know by the Kinyan by Steyafrin is it says Kesef over there. It says Kesef by Steyafrin. So we can only learn from Ephraim not all Kinyanim that apply to Sadeh, but only Kinyanim that involve Kesef that can be done by a Sadeh. And since a Kinyan Chalipin can be done even without Kesef, meaning even if what's being used is worthless, nevertheless it will still be a Kinyan. Therefore, such a Kinyan cannot be used for Kiddushin. So that was an interesting twist in the difference between Rashi and Tosfos on how you understand why Chalipin does not work for a Kiddushin. Okay, so that took us to where we are today. And I believe we got up to the 2 dots where we learned the Minyan of the Sefer tells you that Chalitza does not work to discharge a marriage. You need Dafka to have a get or Misa, and we learn it from Sefer Krisos, which the Torah tells us by a get, Sefer Karsa, vein davar acher karsha, chalitza would not do that. Bekesef. Now we already learned some of this Gemara yesterday, because when the Gemara was trying to explain why the Tana used the word niknis, it was to do with how we know kesef works and kesef ikrikinyan. But now the Gemara is actually asking the main focus of the question: what is the makar for kinyan kesef, for kedusha kesef? Minale, how do we know that that kedushin could be accomplished with kesef? Visu, and we have another question. A father has a right to marry his daughter off, and he could marry his daughter off. Rashi says, "Shakesef yishaloi." He is the one who receives the kesef, and he gets to keep the kesef. Or if he was marrying her off with shtar, v'hu mekabel shtar. Or if he is allowing her to become a kudeshes b'bia, v'hu moisher l'bia al korcha. Even if it's against her will, if she's a young girl, the father has control over that.
We're talking about Ketana, right?
So Rashi says, "Ba'oid naira," even when she's a naira, up until she becomes a boigris. So even after her bas mitzvah, until she becomes a boigris, the father has the schus to marry her off and to keep the money. So we know on the mikni b'kesef and the kesef d'avuahu. So there's two questions. We know on hanach tarti. How do we know two things? A is the mikni b'kesef, kidikatani masnisin. And once we're at it, let's understand something else. We know on sha'av zakoi boy kidikatani hasan. How do we know that the father gets to keep it? Amar Rav Yehuda, Dr. Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav and the name of Rab, the Amar Kra. The pasuk says, referring to an Amma Ivriya. Pasuk tells us as follows: Vim shlosh eila lo yasala v'yatzer chinam ein kasef. Then the Amma Ivriya goes free. She doesn't have to pay. She doesn't have to redeem herself. So the Gemara is medayik on this pasuk. Ein kasef v'yatzer chinam ein kasef. Ein kasef lo adon zeh. This adon, a man who bought an Amma Ivriya, he gets nothing if she's getting released. But another adon, when he's giving up his rights to her, will receive money. Umanu, who's the other adon that the Torah is alluding to? Av, the father. So Rashi explains. You have an Amma Ivriya who's going free from her servitude with simani nairis, because that's one of the things that releases her if she becomes a naira. Umatzi l'michtav, the Torah could have just said v'yatza chinam, and we know if she's going out chinam, she's not paying. But the Torah is stuck in two extra words. V'loy boy ein kasef. Didn't have to stick in the words ein kasef. Elo l'midrash brei to teach us ein kasef l'adon zeh k'shiyotza mimenu. A standard adon who purchases an Amma Ivriya, if this woman is leaving with simonim, he gets no money at all. He walks free without paying him. But there's another case where someone has some type of control over a woman, and when he gives up, when he relinquishes that control, he is entitled to money. And who is that? That is a father who's marrying off his daughter. It says in kasef, so there is kasef involved in the transaction. But who said that the father gets to keep the money? Maybe she should get to keep the money. As Rashi explains, the have a high kesef. The halaksiv ein loy kesef. It doesn't have yatzachinim ein loy kesef. The teidbik we know, so that you should be able to be medayik from that as well. Of ein kasef la'adon zeh, but yesh kesef la'adon nacher. Elahachi doik mina. This is what you could be medayik. Ein kasef b'yitziyazu. This release does not involve the exchange of any funds. Aval yesh kesef b'yitziyah acheres. But there's another type of yitziyah, like when the father is marrying off his daughter, there's a transaction of kesef involved, but it doesn't state who that money will go to. But the money goes to her. We're talking about a naira who's an adult. That's not logical. The husband, the father has ownership over her Kiddushin. if the father has ownership over her Kiddushin, because the Chsiv Biti Nasati L'Ishazeh, so you see that he is in control over her marriage, is it logical to say, Ve'i Shakla Kaspa? That's not logical. He owns this Kiddushin. So surely he should be entitled to keep the funds for it. As Rashi says, V'yu Tishkla Kaspa Bitmiya, After Shachinam Zikeu Akosov, B'Kabbalas Kedusha. If the Torah is being mezakeh him with being Mekabel Kiddushin, it's pretty obvious that the intent of the Torah is that he should keep that money. Fact the Gemara, the Ema Hanami Liktanu de Laslayat. When will you make an argument that it's logical that the father should keep the money? That's if we're talking about a girl who's a ketana. That less loyad lekabel kedushin. A ketana cannot possibly be mekabel or o kedushin. Aval naira. When we're talking about an older girl who's past pas mitzvah, there is loyad lekabel kedushin. She technically is an adult, and she should be able to be mekabel her own kedushin. Maybe tiktish hinamsha. Maybe she could make her own kedushin. This is kaspa, and she should be able to keep the money. Because you need to understand, the pasuk of a Yotzechinam is referring to a girl who was a ketana, who became 12, she became a naira. At that point, maybe you could make a deal that the father marries her off and the father keeps the money. But we're discussing a girl who's older than that, a girl who's not referenced in the pasuk of a Yotzechinam in Kasar. How do we know that in naira, the father has the right to marry her off? A, and B is that the father keeps the money. When did the Torah say that the father has control over her kedushin and therefore he keeps the money? She has no das. The afal gav, the krah the moiti shemra b'nayriksid. The pasuk of moiti shemra, where the father gets to keep the knas, is speaking about a naira. So in fact, you see a little bit of a remez that even in naira the father has control over. The chsiv nasnu lavia naira. That doesn't prove that a father has control over her kedushin, because la'olam the kitchen held b'kedusha. Maybe this woman became mikudeshes only when she was a ketana, but if she was an adult, maybe not. Aval naira de islo yad, but a naira who has her own yad, because the mishavish de sayers gedaili lechol dover lechol oinshin u'lemomen shemechameka chamamkar memkar. Once she's an adult, maybe take the snavsha. How do you know that the father still has a right over her kedushin? And for the Gemara Amar Krar, we have to introduce a new pasuk, a new limud. The Yotzechina might work very good to teach us a ketana, but for a naira, we have another pasuk of Binurel Beisavia. This pasuk is a pasuk that's not even talking about mominus at all. It's actually talking about the father's right to be mefer his daughter's nedarim. And the pasuk says, Eila chukim hashetziva Hashem es Moshe benish lishne b'nov levitoi b'nurel beisavia. And what do we learn from here? Binurel, when she is binurel beisavia, she's in her father's control. In other words, kol shvach ne'orim alovia. Any benefit that she generates, he gets to keep. As Rashi says, Hachi darshla kol zman shebinurel he shalavia. Any time that she's in her years of nairas, it's not years, it's months really, shalavia, everything belongs to her father. The kol shvach haba la lavia. So that's how we would know that the father controls her kedusha. Back to Gemara. Ve'lahad amar Rav Huna amar Rav. Minayin shemai sabas la'av. Rav Huna amar Rav was struggling to learn a makar that if a girl works and she earns wages, how do we know that the father keeps those wages? And he found the following pasuk. Shenemar v'chiyimkar ish es bitoi la'ama. A father has a right to sell his daughter as an amma. And as Rashi speaks out, this is an extra pasuk. The pasuk of V'chiyim Creation B'dei La'ama is an extra pasuk. V'darish lei, and we darshan it, B'dei La'ama, that B'dei Harehi Loika. His daughter is to him like an Amma is, he has an ownership in her. Ma'ama, Ma'isi Yodel Rabba. Just like an Amma of Riyah, whatever she produces, her Ma'isi Yodayim, belong to her Adon. Avba, so to a daughter, even though she's a naira, Ma'isi Yodel love you. So let's have a look how you know this is speaking even about a naira. So Rashi's ubavita naira ashmiina. This pasuk of Kiyim Geishas Bita La'ama is speaking about a naira. Libektana lo yitzrich. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that the father owns the Ma'aseh Yadayim of his daughter who's a Ktana, because we know that he could even sell his daughter who's a Ktana. He cannot sell his daughter who's a Naira, but he can sell his daughter who's a Ktana. And therefore we have the logic. Hashta Zavuni Mazvina, if he can sell her, Ma'aseh Yadayim, surely he has the right to keep what she produces. To frag the Gemara the following question. If your limud of Binurei Beis Aviyah is a legitimate limud, and you learn from there that Kol Shvach Nurim Laviyah, and that's how you learn that the father is responsible and gets to keep her Kesef Kiddushin even when she's a Naira, well, you should also automatically know from that pasuk that anything that she produces, that her Ma'aseh Yadayim are also Laviyah. So why did Reb Huna and Rav have to find a pasuk, an extra pasuk of Esbitei La'ama to teach us that? Binurei Beis Aviyah is a big general clause that says that in every which way the father keeps anything that's generated by his daughter the Naira. Typically, mi Binurei Beis Aviyah. Elamai, your whole argument that from Binurei Beis Aviyah you could learn this grand halacha that everything that belongs to a Naira automatically goes to the father, that's false. That's a false limud, because if it was good, Rav would have used it. Ela ba'afaris nedarim hu d'chsev. The pasuk is stating a halacha relevant to afaris nedarim. Only by afaris nedarim is Binurei Beis Aviyah. But like Gabedini Mominis, like Kesef Kiddushin, or like Ma'aseh Yadayim, Binurei Beis Aviyah tells us nothing at all. We have a pasuk that talks about Ma'aseh Yadayim, which is V'chiyim Kreish, Esbitei La'ama, but we still don't have a pasuk to teach us that the Kiddushin of a Naira goes to the father. So Hakanami ba'afaris nedarim hu d'chsev. The pasuk of Binurei Beis Aviyah is only speaking about afaris nedarim. Frek the Gemara v'chitema neilach minei. So big deal. So the pasuk is referring only to afaris nedarim. But why don't we learn halacha? Just like the Torah places a girl into the father's rishos lagabe afaris nedarim, who had in lagabe everything else. The Torah says because mamana meisura lo yalfina. Lagabe isur v'heter, the Torah tells us Binurei Beis Aviyah. But we cannot stretch that and apply it to Dinei Mamanis as well. Let's see Rashi. If in fact there's a good limud from the pasuk of Binurei Beis Aviyah, if that was the case, then Rav wouldn't have need to find another drasha to prove that the father gets to keep the Ma'aseh Yadayim of a night. From Binurei Beis Aviyah, you cannot learn anything about Shvach Nurim. That's a simple statement related only to the parsha of Nedarim. So now the Gemara says, let's see if we can reach out and find another place where we could learn from. And Rashi alluded to that earlier. The halacha is a naira who gets violated, the violator has to pay a knas. Who does he pay the knas to? Rashi quoted the pasuk. V'nosan la'avi hanaira. V'nosnoi la'avi hanaira. So you see the father is entitled to keep the knas of a girl who's a naira. So if he gets to keep the knas of a girl who's a naira, maybe he should also be able to keep the kesef kedushin of a girl who's a naira. Dr. Gemara, you wouldn't have such a raya. It's a mamana miknasa lo yalfina. Allah stated by knas would not necessarily follow through to dinei mamanis, and therefore that would not be a good makar. As Rashi says, the money gets paid to the father. We wouldn't be able to bring a raya because mamana miknasa lo yalfinan shaknas kula chiddush. The whole concept of a knas as a chiddush, it's on its own level, it has its own rules, not to be applied to anything else. And therefore we're back to square one. So Dr. Gemara, maybe we have another makar. Let's see if we could learn it out of Boshis Ubagam. Because the law is, Rashi says, if someone violates his daughter, he has to make a payment for the humiliation that he caused her and for the damage that he caused her, because she won't be so desirable anymore. Who gets those damages? La'av. The father receives payment for those damages. V'hanu lav k'nosaninu. And these are not k'nosas. It's a mamana. So why don't you learn it out of Boshis Upagam? We're on the second to the bottom line on Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Learn it out of Boishes and Pagam, just like a father's entitled to the mominus of Boishes and Pagam when his daughter is violated, even though she's a naira already, so too he should be entitled to her kesef kedushin. Zoktamar, you cannot bring a right because shiny Boishes and Pagam to aviyah shach begavayu. Boishes and Pagam, there's a special reason why the father gets it. He's not getting it because he's taking it from her. He's getting it because he's the one who is actually suffering the damages. Why is he the one who's suffering the damages? Zok Rashi, why is that? Because he has the rights to be mevayisher, to put her into a situation to benefit off humiliation that she'll have and off a pagam that she'll have. If he has the right to sell the rights to her busha and her pagam, so clearly he owns those rights. Where do you see he could do that? He would be able to marry her off to a menuvel or mukashchin. That's a lot of boishes pagam, marrying her off to some menuvel or mukashchin. He is actually causing damage directly to the father. Now this woman becomes worth less, and not so many people are going to want her. So in fact, the father directly is impacted by the fact that his daughter is worth less. Elam Istavra, we have to go back to the earlier pshat. How do we know that a father has control over his daughter's Kiddushin and he keeps the money? Elam Istavra, the whole story must be, is the Chikam Mayit. When we say by a Tana, we learned that in kesef l'adon zeh, or yesh kesef l'adon acher, maybe we learn more from there as well. Elam istaver the kikam mayit, going on to Daf Dalet Amud Aleph, the kikam mayit yitzia the kavasa lo kamamayit. What type of yitzia is the pasuk referring to? The Yatzachinim and Kasef, Davka and Kasef, when she's being released from an Adain, but Hayesh Kasef for a different Adain. That's only if it's a similar Yitzia to the Yitzia that's occurring when a woman goes free from her Adain, from her master. Zokt Rashi, what does that mean? Yitzias Erisin, Dumya, the Yitzias Amma, Kamamayit Midinama. What type of yitzia we're referring to? A yitzia when a woman is becoming mikudeshes. That's what we're comparing. A woman who leaves her other's rishus ain't kasef, but a woman who's going out of her father's rishus because she's becoming mikudeshes, there is kasef. Ulamemar the yesh kesef bar, and it teaches us that there is a monetary transaction when a woman leaves her father's house for kedushin, unlike when a woman leaves the household of an Adain. And Umay Yitzias Amar Avriya in Kasaf La'adain, the Nafka Mer Shusei Ka'amar Kra. Just like when we say Ein Kasaf, when a woman is released from her Adain, who's not getting the Kesef? The man who's releasing her. The Adain, he's not getting the Kesef. Af Miyut Yesh Kasef. So when we're being medayik that there's another Adain who gets Kesef, who receives Kesef, the Kadayik, Litzias Ersin Yesh Kesef, who gets that Kesef? Lemishi Yota Heimenu Ka'amar V'Hainuav. The pasuk, by definition, through its dik, is not only saying that there's money involved, but that the money that's involved is payable to the father and not to the daughter. Gewaltig. Practical Gemara, but it's not daima anyway. You want to make this big deal that whenever there's a yitzia, there's a chiyuv to give kesef, and it goes to the person who's giving up his rights, which is the father. Well, there's a dissimilarity between Kiddushin and the pasuk of an Adon freeing his maidservant. V'haladamya hayitzia v'hayitzia. There's a very significant difference. If you're claiming that we only deal with similar yitzias, well, the yitzia of marriage is not similar at all to the yitzia of an Adon, because hasam nafkalar mishadon lagamri. When a girl upon Nairis leaves the domain of her Adon, She's completely disconnected from her Adon. But v'hacha akati misira l'chuppah. We're talking about Kiddushin over here. When the father accepts the Mois Kiddushin, he's not totally being released from his rishus. He still has control over her. As Rashi says, they're not the same. The Yitzias Erisin also lemute. How could you say that the V'yatza Chinim in Kasav is telling you that the other Yitziyah, the Yitziyah of Erisin, there is Kesef? Halav the Kavotzahi. It's not really a similar type of Yitziyah, because the Yitziyah of an Ummah is complete, but the Yitziyah of a woman getting Kedushin, the Katali Nafka Meshusei Da'av, L'gabi Wat Halachas, L'mai Siyodeh, Uli Rishasa. Even after the Kedushin, the father still is entitled to the Maishi Daim of his daughter, and should she die, he would yarshin her until there's a chuppah. So once again, how could you learn from V'yatza Chinim in Kasef that in Naira, that the father marries off, the father is entitled to keep the Kesef Kedushin? Zog to Gemara, because Nedarim, Bafaris Nedarim, Mir Nafkalei Mershusah. There was a Yitziyah from the Rishus of the father once he's Makabal Kedushin. Because like we learned in the Nedarim, once she's Ureses, it's a via Ubaila Bafir Nidarel. So she left his Rishus, Lagabe, him having exclusive rights to be made for her Nedarim. Now he has shared rights to be made for her Nedarim. So since she in fact did leave his Rishus, his total dominance, Lagabe Nedarim, that's enough that we will consider Kiddushin a Yitzid de Kavasa, and therefore that is our makar, that if a father marries off a daughter when she's a Naira, he is entitled to the money because of a Yotzes Chinam and Kasef. So Rashi Bafaris Nedarim Mia Nafkalei Meshusei, She'ena Yachal Hafer Levadoi, he could no longer make for the nether without the assistance of the father, of the husband. It's not we learned Naira Ham Urasa Avia Ubaila Mafir Nidara. So that is, we're at a shtickle maskon in the Gemara that the makar that a father keeps Kesef Kedushin, say if she's a Tana, say if she's a Naira, is from V'yatza Chinim in Kasef. What type of Yitziyah from an Adon involves no money at all? That's when she's being released from an Adon. But there's another similar type of Yitziyah, such as when a man gives his daughter up L'Kedushin, there is an exchange of money, and the money goes to the person who's giving her up, just like in the case of a Ummah going free, and therefore the father receives the Kesef Kedushin. Frag the Gemara. Are you telling me that the pasuk of a Yotza Chinam in Kasef is to teach us the halacha that the father gets to keep her Kesef Kedushin? I don't think so. The Yotza Chinam is occupied. We need the Yotza Chinam to tell us a different halacha that was taught us in the following brayse. The Tanya we learned. The Yotza Chinam elu yimei bagris. The Yotza Chinam means that if she's a boygris, she gets to go free. Ein Kasef elu yimei nairis. She gets to go free with yimei nairis. Now that's very interesting, because if a woman goes free as an Ummah when she becomes a Naira, what type of free is she going when she's a boygris? She has already been freed as soon as she became a Naira. So that's something that the Gemara is going to address. But let's see what the Rashi says. When a girl becomes a boygris, it's at that point in time where she'll go free if she's an Ummah. Ein Kasov teaches you, Ein Kasov eladavar acher moitzia. Something else can also be a release. Allow her to be released from her father's domain, from her Adon, from her owner's domain. Elu yimei nairis. This is when she becomes a nair. Shortly, the Gemara is going to ask, if a woman already goes free and she's no longer an Amma, when she becomes a Naira, Bagris Maya Vidite. What exactly is Bagris going to accomplish to free her? She's already a free woman. Amar Ravina, Zak Ravina. In fact, there is such a limud, but there's more room to darshan from this pasuk, so that we can also learn about the Kabbalah's Kiddushin of the father from this pasuk. Because in Cain, if the only thing the Torah wanted to teach us was that a woman goes free when she becomes a Naira, Le Mikra, Ein Kasaf without the Yud. My Ein Kasaf with the Yud, that gives us an extra limit. That extra yud makes a very big difference. And we darshan ein kesef lodin zeh, avol yesh kesef lodin acher. Who is that other? Adon uman niu av. That's the father. So now we see that we're making a big deal out of a little yud. How do I know? Where do I have a precedent that you can make a big deal out of a little yud? The Tanya we learned, v'zera ein law. What is the halacha if a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen? If a Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. I'm sorry, if a Bas Kohen marries a Yisrael. So a Bas Kohen is allowed to eat truma from her father's household. She marries a Yisrael, she's no longer allowed to eat truma from her father's household. Her marriage breaks up, her husband dies or her husband divorces her, she goes back to her father's household and she can once again eat truma. But if she has children with this Yisrael and then he dies, then she no longer can go back to her father's household to eat truma because she already has children. And if we look at the pasuk inside, the pasuk is Uvas Kohen, Kisia Almanu Ugrusha. A Bas Kohen married a Yisrael, and because of that, she was no longer allowed to eat truma. But then she became an Almanu Ugrusha, her marriage to the Yisrael disintegrated, and Vizera Einla, and she doesn't have any children that sort of connect her to the Yisrael, and she's no longer married to him. Only then, Vishava El Beis Avia Kinureh, and once again, Milechem Avia Teichel, she will be able to eat truma. So we darshan v'zera einla. If she has no children, she can go back to her father's household and eat truma. But ainli elazara, that would only tell me if she has actual children. But what if she had a child, and then she had a grandchild, and then the child dies? So now she has grandchildren, but she doesn't have children. Will she be able to go back to her father's household and eat truma? Zera zara minayin. How do we know that even though she has no surviving children, but she has a grandchild, how do you know that she's not allowed to eat truma? Talmud loimer zera ein la. And from that little yud, we darshan ayin la. Look closely to see if you can find any type of zera, meaning even though she has no child alive, but if there's even a grandchild that's alive, that will be good enough. The ainli el zera kosher. I would think that only if she had zera kosher is it acceptable that she is. Only if she has zera kosher do we say that she cannot eat truma from her father's household. But zera apostle, what if she has grandchildren that are, let's say, mamzerim? Maybe that's not called her zera, and maybe she'll be able to eat truma minayin. Talmud loimer zera ein la ayin la. Any type of offspring that she has alive, whether it's only a grandchild and not a child, whether the grandchild is a mamzer, either way, that would disqualify her from eating truma. Fragt the Gemara, ve'afikta lizera zara. I don't understand. How can you use v'zera ein la to tell you that even if it's a zera apostle, we already use v'zera ein la to tell you that even a grandchild's good enough? Zok to Gemara, I don't need it. I actually don't need two limudim. From the ayin law, I only need to learn zera apostle. A grandchild without any psukim, with logic alone, I would know that it would disqualify her from eating truma. Zera zara itzrich kra, because we have an overarching rule that bonim, the bnei bonim hareim kaban. A grandchild is just like a child. He itzrich kra lezera apostle. The ayin law, the extra limud that we're learning, is to tell us that even a zera apostle will disqualify her from going back to her father's household and eating truma. Zok to Gemara, v'tana gufei minole didarshach. Yes, you've proven quite well that our tanoim make a drasha out of this extra yud. But how did the tanoim know that you could make such a drasha? V'tana gufei minole didarshach. Amri zok to Gemara, we see it from the case of Bilam. T'chsiv me'ein Bilam. It says me'ein Yavami. So let's look at these two psukim. By Bilam it said, Bilam refuses to come with us. And by Yibam it says, if someone doesn't want to do Yibam, he wants to make chalitza, she says to Bezin, V'amar me'ein yavami lahakim la'achiv shein. So there, it doesn't have a yud. So you see that the word means no, even without the yud. So the yud is not necessary. It's not a necessary part of the word. Yet by zera ein la, there's an yud there that it doesn't have to be there. Ein means not, even without that extra yud. It must be that yud is extra, and therefore we can use it to teach us. In the case of zera ein la, it will teach us that even a zera apostle will disqualify her from eating truma, and will also use the v'yatachinum ein kasef to teach us that not only does a naira go free from an adon, but ein kasef l'adon zeh, aval yesh kasef l'adon acher, the kesef kedushin that comes in for an isha naira goes to her father. Zok to Gemara, v'isrich l'michtav kiddushay alavia. We need a pasuk to teach us that the kedushin goes to her father, which we learn from v'yatzachinum ein kasef. V'isrich l'michtav ma'asid alavia, and we need a separate pasuk of a chiyimker ish es bitay la'ama, where we learn from that pasuk, Rav taught us from that pasuk, that the father is entitled to keep the ma'aseh yadayim of his daughter. I need both those psukim. Because of Rachmana Kiddushay Alavia, if the Torah only taught us that the father gets to keep the kesef kedushin for his daughter, Havamina, I would have said Mishum D'Lo Tarchabahu. She didn't work for it; it just came in as a bonus. So therefore, maybe the father should be entitled to take that from the daughter. But if she worked hard and she has a job and she's busting herself, that's money that she worked hard for. Maybe as a nair she should be able to keep that money to herself. That's why we need a pasuk of v'chiyimker ishes bitei la'ama, that he is still entitled to that money. And if we only knew that the father gets to keep the ma'aseh yadayim of his daughter, who is a naira, that's because the commitment, the father supporting his daughter. If he's supporting his daughter, there's a good argument to make that he should be able to keep her earnings. Kiddushin, where the father hasn't done anything that we would say he's entitled to kesef kedushin because of that. Ema didahavu, maybe she should be able to keep it. Shricha, that's why we need a pasuk to teach us specifically that he can keep her kesef kedushin as well. Gewaltig. Gufa. Now the Gemara is going to drill down into this limud of how we know that a woman goes free when she's a naira and as a bagus. Gufa. V'yatzachinam elul yimei bagus. That teaches us that a woman who becomes a bagus goes free if she's an amma hivriya. Ein kasav elul yimei nairis. Frag the Gemara v'lichte v'chman nairis. If the Torah would have been specific and have told us that a woman who's a naira goes free, then v'laboy bagus. I don't need a pasuk to tell you that a bagus goes free, because a bagus is already free. 6 months ago, she became free as soon as she became an naira. Amar Rabba, Rabba says, "Bazeh v'limid alseh." Do we have a pasuk that's telling us for Yatzachina, right? But we don't know exactly what time in your life it applies to. So if you only had one pasuk, you would use it for the smallest chiddush, that she goes free when she becomes a bagus. But since you have another pasuk, another extra word, that teaches us that she can go even further. So that's bazeh v'limid alseh. As Rashi explains, the Torah doesn't specifically say the word naira. We have to figure it out. We have to figure it out on our own. What else should trigger her going free? So that's why we need two psukim to teach us even naira. Because of chad, if we only had one pasuk saying that she goes free spontaneously, I would have said the smaller chiddush that she doesn't go free until she becomes a bagros. Aval nairus, but maybe when she's only a naira, maybe loy mafvikla. Maybe the Torah is not telling us a big chiddush that even as a naira she already walks free. Therefore, that's why the Torah said two lemudim, and therefore al korcha chad minay nairus also. If we have two limudim, one will be for bagros, and the other one tells us that even when she's a naira, she goes free. Where do you see the Torah does such things? Midi dehava toishav usechir. The Torah says that someone who's a toishav and a schir of a kohen gets to eat truma, does not get to eat truma. Right? It says toishav usechir, of a kohen lo yochel kodesh. He may not eat truma. The Tanya we learned toishav zekanui kinyan olam. A toishav is an eved ivri. Like Rashi says, is a nirtza biyat kohen. We know that if an eved ivri says after his time to go free arrives, I don't want to go free. I like it here. The halach is they drill a hole in his ear and he remains working for the adon la'olam. La'olam means until yovel. But v'aval pikein ein gufay kani like kishara avodim knainim. That doesn't give an eved ivri the status of an eved knaini. The kohen doesn't own the body of the eved ivri, and therefore lechal b'truma, and therefore he won't be able to eat truma, because we know kinyan kasboy of a kohen eats truma. This is still not kinyan kasboy, although it's a very long-term contract. So Toishav Zakani Kinyan Olam, that teaches us that somebody who's going to be working as an Eved Ivri for his Adon who's a Kohen up until Yovel will not eat Truma. Schir Zakani Kinyan Shanam. That's somebody who's only going to be an Eved Ivri for 6 years. He doesn't either have a right to eat Truma. So for the Gemara, Yomer Toishav, Yomer Schir. Why didn't the Torah just tell us that even an Eved Anirtza who's going to be here for 50 years, even an Eved Anirtza does not have the right to eat Truma? And I figure it out. If a nirtza, an Eved who's nirtza cannot eat truma, surely surely an Eved Ivri who's only going to be there for 6 years, surely he shouldn't either be able to eat truma. So you're right. If I know for sure that a nirtza cannot eat truma, I would figure it out on my own that a Eved Ivri for 6 years cannot eat truma. But the problem is, Ilu Kain, if the Torah didn't say both Toshav and Sechir, Toshav Zakani Kinyan Shanam, I might have explained it differently. I might have translated a Toshav. All the Torah said was that a Toshav doesn't need Truma. I would say that Toshav means an Eved Ivri who's only there for 6 years. He can't eat Truma. But I might mistakenly think, if there's an Eved who's going to stay for 50 years, maybe Eichel, maybe he could eat Truma. That's why Bas Schir V'limit al Toshav. Since the Torah said Toshav V'schir, Schir means someone who's only employed for 6 years. Toshav means someone who's employed longer, and that will be Eved Nirtza. So V'limit al Toshav Sha'af Abisha Koni Kinyan Olam Einei Oichel, he still may not eat Truma. So too over here we have V'yatzachina Ein Kasa V'yatzachina Boigris Ein Kasa of Nairis, and we only know Ein Kasa is Nairis because we have the V'yatzachina telling us about Boigris. You cannot compare our case to that case because Hasam Shrei Gufe Ninu. We're talking about two different people. One is an Eved for 6 years. One's an Eved for 50 years. The Chinami cause of Rachmana Toishav Nirtza Lo Yoichal. The Hadar cause of Idach. Sure, there's two different people, but it's two different halachas. A Toishav doesn't need Truma and a Schir doesn't need Truma. There's nothing wrong with the Torah speaking it out even beferish that those two people don't need Truma. The only question you would have on it is why would the Torah speak out that a Eved of 6 years cannot eat Truma? You should know it's from a Kal V'chaymer. No, that's not so bad. Sacher is a milsa the asa b'Kal V'chaymer because I can make a Kal V'chaymer. If a Toshav doesn't eat Truma, surely a Schir doesn't. But that's not fair because milsa the asa b'Kal V'chaymer Torah for the chasav lokra. So even after we know that Toshav means a long-term Eved and Schir means a short-term Eved, it still is justifiable that the Torah mentioned them both, even though you could learn one from the other with a Kal V'chaymer, because we have a rule, the Torah often says things that we could have otherwise known of a Kal V'chaymer. Elahacha, when you're talking about a girl, and we're saying that she goes out when she's a Naira, not when she's a Bagris, Chad Gufahi, she's one Guf. Ki nafka lei b'Nairis. Once we know she goes out with Nairis, B'Bagris, my boigabe. She's never there. So it only makes sense to have two psukim, even though one is redundant, if each one on its own that has a good meaning. It's just that there's a Kal V'chaymer. But here, it makes Bagris wrong. She, in fact, does not go out with Bagris because she's already free since she's a Naira. So you cannot say Bazav a limit al zeh when it comes to the case of a woman going free when she's a Naira or a Bagris. Ela Amar Abaye, Zok Abaye, Lo Nitzricha Ella Lebeger the islanders. The reason why it says Ein Kasef is an iris and V'yatachinim is a boigris. We had a question we don't need a pasuk for boigris because a boigris doesn't go free. She's already went free when she was an Ira. Dr. Baye, not all women go free when they became an Ira, because there's some women who don't become an Ira. They go straight from a katana to a boigris. Who is that? An islandess who never sees siman a nairos. So kedai chamina. I would have thought b'nairos tepuk b'bagris lo tepuk. I might have thought that only a naira goes free. A boigris doesn't go free, and therefore this islandess would not go free at all. Kamash malon, that an islandess goes free as well when she receives her simone bagris. Gewaltig. Let's stop here. We're an Amud ahead because today's daf is Gimel, and we Baruch Hashem completed daf Dalet Amud Aleph, and we will continue tomorrow from Maskif on daf Dalet Amud Vav. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.